welcome to today's panel discussion on improving access and skills for all students. My name is Joysy. I'm an advisor, entrepreneur, and former director of education at Nesta, an innovation foundation based in the UK. I would like to welcome our panelists to join me in a deep dive into the challenges and opportunities presented by the global pandemic. I'm delighted to be joined by Madge, Head of Innovative Finance, Philanthropic and Private Sector Partnerships for Education Cannot Wait, a UN-hosted global fund dedicated to education in emergencies. Laura Stevens, Learning Support Subject Leader and Tutor of Barton Peveril Sixth Form College in Hampshire in the UK. Chris Dyson, Head Teacher of Parklands Primary School in Leeds in the UK. And finally, Paul Gardner, Secondary School Deputy Head Teacher of Deira International School in Dubai. So let's start with the first question of what are your main challenges with ensuring digital inclusion, access, and skills for students at all levels of ability and need? And let's start with Chris to share his perspective from UK.
Hi and welcome everybody, and thank you for inviting me to this very prestigious gathering today. Now, the school where I work at is based in Leeds, in Seacroft. It's one of Europe's largest council estates, and it's one of the most deprived primary schools in the country. And I think, Joysy, you hit the nail on the head there. What we've seen through COVID is a huge gap now that's growing between the disadvantaged children and the children like my own at home. Now, remote learning has really progressed so much over the last 6 months. And what the government here have done, have created an online set of lessons using the Oak Academy, which is absolutely spectacular and brilliant if you've got access to devices. Now, sadly, I did a questionnaire with my parents, and we only found out that only 18% of the parents had a laptop at home. And more significantly, 60% of the parents were just using the mum's mobile phone or the dad's mobile phone for the data. So what we've actually seen during this COVID is a huge gap now between my lovely children currently sat at home on their own laptops doing brilliant online learning from the safety of their own home, to what we've got a situation in deprived areas now where we're still using the old-fashioned textbooks, the old-fashioned piece of the work packs, because we just do not have the devices for these children to be working at home, and we just do not have the digital broadband speed that a lot of us take for granted.
Thank you, Chris. If I could ask Laura to share her insights.
I think one of the key things is that we often might assume that students feel really comfortable with digital skills and digital inclusion, when actually that's a skill that we need to teach them in their own right. So it's not only the skills that you need to use a digital device or the resources that we're providing them, but also all the skills that go alongside that. So being able to be organised and to effectively digest all this information that's being given. Because although it's excellent that in this digital time of digital learning, we can provide a lot more information, we also need to think about how much information those students are getting on a daily basis and how they're able to take that in. So I think for us, one of the main challenges is developing those skills beyond just digital literacy, but also all the skills that students across the college, but in particular students with a learning support need, require beyond just using a digital device.
I think you're absolutely right. It's not enough to just have the resources, but also making sure that students are well supported and those with special needs. Let's hear from Paul in Dubai.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was really interested listening to Chris, actually, because the difference of perspective as to where you are our demographic is quite affluent in Dubai, so we don't have the same problems. But it's not to say that we don't have problems or challenges that we face. For us, I mean, we've been full-time synchronous learning from day one, pretty much. Our digital plan pulled through from kind of pre-pandemic, and we just kind of advanced what we were hoping to do. We expedited it in a way, really. The main issues for us came around confidence and competence for staff. Being an online teacher myself, I felt very much like an NQT, and making sure that quality first teaching was, what was happening, in every lesson was really, really challenging, and that's the feedback we've had from our staff here and around the country, really, and the city in Dubai. So confidence and competence were the key things to tap into.
Thank you. Madge, what's been your experience?
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. And it's really interesting hearing the different perspectives, because I guess the group of children that we work with at Education Cannot Wait are those sort of furthest left behind. So on top of, the challenges that Chris has talked about, even in terms of basic infrastructure and connectivity, there's compounding issues on them in the sense that they're living in, transient locations. They're living in refugee camps where governments have actually denied access to the internet. And so, there are basic sort of challenges we're facing to access that prevent these children from accessing education. And I think what I would say for us is, we've never been in a situation this dire with 1.5 billion school-aged children, suddenly forced out of a traditional classroom. But for the children that we work with, those that are in conflict and crisis, rural and remote settings, affected by natural disasters, this is a 365-day-a-year problem that we're facing with them. Many of these children we just got kind of back into school. In an ideal world, some of the solutions that I'm hearing us talk about, things that Paul mentioned, we dream of having that same access for these kids, because it's actually a life-saving force for them to kind of get them reconnected to education. And we're going to lose a range of them if we don't have it. And so the issues like connectivity, access to devices and infrastructure, which are exponential, because some of these parents have left, the countries that they come from with maybe one smartphone with them that might have been stolen or lost along the way. So they just simply don't have those points of access. The know-how, that Laura talked about, for teachers, for students and their families in settings like Burkina Faso and Mali where we work, some of these people have never, ever seen a smartphone or a digital device. And so you're starting at a much lower threshold of understanding. And I think the important thing is not just to provide the access, but to think about the full ecosystem of support when we do introduce digital tools, which we want and need to in these environments. It's about training the teachers, training the students, training the families, including in how to keep themselves safe online, and in terms of how to maintain and charge devices. There's so many, which again, a lot of them don't have access to electrical outlets. So it's really thinking through the full ecosystem, and the kids that we deal with are so much further behind sometimes than their peers around the world that we have to account for where they're at. And in some cases, that's meant that where we operate, we simply cannot even imagine digital solutions. And we're still working with things like radio, TV broadcasts, and sort of finding the solutions that can reach them in whatever way we can.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. Like, some of the context really makes a huge difference in terms of access. And I was just wondering, what are some ways in which you've seen these challenges being addressed through different responses and initiatives? And let's start with the most sort of deprived students, or those who are most marginalized. So Marge, I'm going to come back to you on this one.
Yeah, so pivoting off what I was saying before, when the Ebola crisis hit, we really had to think about how to deploy immediately alternative methods like radio-based learning, and COVID restrictions have meant that in some settings we have had to do that as well. Whatever could work and can get into teachers' hands quickly, we funded and supported to get out there. But I think building on the learnings of Ebola and what we're doing right now, we have to get a little bit more creative. And sometimes there's sort of no tech or low tech solutions, offline learning that you can upload. And I think using the situations when you're not in an immediate crisis to do as much as you can to catch up these communities that are further behind. New partnerships, working with people like telcos around the world. UNICEF, Education Cannot Wait. We're working with partners like Verizon, Microsoft, Porticus on revolutionary sort of plans to not just bring in infrastructure and bridge connectivity, but think through the devices, what children are learning via these devices, how that's standardized and kind of appropriate with national curriculum, not just getting something, they're getting something that is competitive and equal to their peers. And so I think it's about thinking about all the ways that you can reach children. It's a business that we're in, and I think it's about learning in this moment what is possible and really taking that through to once we're out of the crisis and thinking and planning for the next time.
You absolutely hit the nail on the head in terms of understanding what are the gaps and then learning from previous crises to make sure that we are better prepared and resilient for the future. I was just wondering, based on some of the experiences you've had over the last 9 months in UK, addressing some of the challenges and really preparing learners to continue with their learning, what sort of things have your schools tried out to address some of these challenges for kids in disadvantaged areas? Chris, did you want to start off on that?
Yeah, lovely. Well, it's been such an exciting time for leaders at the moment. We've had to be really creative in which we've had to run our schools for our sort of communities. Now, the big challenge I had during lockdown 1 was a real lack of food for the parents and children. So that empowered me to go out to contact all the big businesses like Costa Coffee, Yorkshire Tea, McCain's, to bring the food into school. And one day we managed to do 35,000 meals on one day in the middle of the baking, beautiful sunshine. So lockdown 2's got the different sort of challenges this time because I've still got my food sources going, and it's all been about the digital sort of aspect because we need our children. We need the children in deprived areas to be working so hard to narrow that gap and things. So now the government started distributing some laptops. We were originally getting 67. I worked out I needed 167, but then sadly that was slashed to 13. But then was actually put back up to 65. So I knew I had to be creative and go out there to industry and deal with charities. And I teamed up with someone called Let's Localise, who managed to actually source me 120 laptops donated from businesses. So now I've actually got all the laptops that I need, so I'm in a very fortunate position. My students are as well. But now my next task that I'm currently working on at the moment is to get the broadband into these devices. And again, by teaming up with Vodafone, who gave me 50 brilliant 60 gigabytes of sort of memory, means the children now are slowly but surely being able to access all this brilliant remote learning that we're seeing from the comfort of their own home and to keep society safe.
Thank you, Chris. Laura, if we could ask you about some of the initiatives that you've implemented specifically around student agency and voice and what has really helped them during this crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just not losing sight of the individual as well, that we do provide resources and support through, we have a digital app hub online, we have Google Classroom, we have all these great things going on in the college, providing devices, so that's Chromebooks or desktop computers for students who require them, but also just breaking it down and really thinking about that more personalised one-to-one support for those students who may really need it. So we often in our learning support sessions, we have Google Meets one-to-ones for those students who require it, and one-to-ones when they can actually be in college as well, which is still even better. And really providing them with that specific support they need. And as I said, not losing sight of this individual student who may be struggling to use the devices that we've given them. And I think also really drawing on the students themselves to help others. So we have students that we call technology advocates, and they advise other students how to use the technology, but also they advise teachers how to use the technology as well. So wherever possible, drawing on the students' knowledge and then becoming the experts is ultimately helps us to come over those challenges even better, and building up their own self-confidence at this time when they may be struggling with things like their mental health and their view of themselves as well. So anything that we can give sort of the power and the expertise over to them has sort of enhanced their knowledge and their skills even further.
Thank you. If I could ask, what advice would you give to the education community to ensure high quality learning for all students? What would that be? And I'm going to ask all of you this question now. Let's start with Laura.
Asking the students themselves. I think if you start with the student, they have so much knowledge to draw on and their own experiences. If you can get more of an insight into how they enjoy learning or how they enjoy engaging with the technology that we've got available, and often they will point out things that I've never heard of or technology that I haven't used yet. So anything where I can draw on their knowledge is even better. And I think even things like we work with 16 to 19-year-olds and using the knowledge of the second year students to advise those first years who haven't maybe quite got used to using this or this digital landscape as yet. So anything where those older students can advise the younger ones is really helpful as well.
Great, thank you. So mentoring and really hearing student voice. Chris, if I could ask you for a piece of advice to the education community.
I mean, the big advice to the education community has just been highlighted, as we said with COVID. We need to get rid of that digital gap. We're in the 2021. The United Kingdom is one of the richest countries in the world. So why have we got? Why do we have areas that are really struggling with poor quality broadband? So my message to the education community is quite simply, we've got to learn from this, and we've got to make sure that if anything ever happens like this, we're prepared for all students, not just my own children, but children all around similar areas such as mine, all around the world. But in the year 2020, in an affluent country, the first thing we need to do is sort out the digital gap by getting affordable broadband around the country and around the world.
Thank you. Paul?
When we get to that point, and our school is a good example of when that happens, so to speak, we have kind of equitable access in our community. I think the key is to support your staff in delivering really high quality provision. You've got to keep your messaging simple. You've got to listen to your wider community, your parents and your students, and also just keep an eye on the temperature of your staff room. How the well-being is and what you can do. The low-hanging fruit, the simple wins to kind of bolster a community where they feel safe to take risks with the teaching and learning and ultimately provide high quality provision.
Thank you. And Madge?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is probably to start with the kids furthest left behind. I mean, kids with disabilities in rural, remote settings, refugees and others. When you're thinking about innovation and how to reach them, I think the lesson for the education community is we start with those furthest left behind and cater to kind of what they might need in that lowest sum game. You're going to actually be able to reach everyone if you make it accessible for them. And with a third of the world's children, we recently released a report, currently unable to access remote learning. There's a lot, a big subset of the population that we're looking at there. And, we're asking from ECW's perspective for 400 to 500 million to help reach those furthest behind, because we think that's such a big critical part. And then I would say, to echo Paul and Chris and Laura, we've got to get creative. We've got to innovation, bold new thinking are a necessity, and that's what we've learned from COVID. And we should learn this from other sectors, because for too long, I think education's languished behind things like health and the more visible needs in times of crisis. And so by not finding the solutions that we need right now and bridging this learning and digital divide with the same no-holds-barred approach that we're taking to finding a COVID vaccine, we're ignoring the education crisis that we've been hurtling towards and the divide that we now currently face, and it is a problem. So it's a message, if we don't sort of act now, that the world's kids, that some of their futures matter more than others. And I just think that inequity in 2021 is impossible. And I do think that, to end on a more positive note, that there is hope in this, and we have, we see around the world the success in certain locations, even some of those that we're working in, when kids are given that access to technology and the spark it lights in them, the progress they make, and that we don't reverse the gains that we have made with them. And so I think scale up is possible with the right investments and partnership, the collective and collaborative partnerships. And the last thing I want to say, and I'm stealing this a little bit from Laura, but I love what she said about that peer-to-peer learning, because I think it is about, and teaching. It's focused on what they learn, as well as how to get them the right solutions. It's not just about putting a device in a kid's hands. It's what's on there. It's how are you going to teach them? How are they going to teach others? And thinking about that entire ecosystem. So,
thank you. So that's a fantastic summary, because in terms of partnership, in terms of starting with the needs of the most disadvantaged and then making sure that everyone, because if you start with the most disadvantaged, inevitably everyone else will be covered. So this has been a really fantastic discussion, and the key takeaway for me really is around three things. It's the public-private partnership, it's about student voice and agency, and it's about improving the resilience of the system and learning from the lessons from the past and the current changes that are going on. So on that note, I just wanted to thank everyone for your time and your insights, and for our viewers who have joined this discussion. Thank you very much.
Welcome back to the BettFest studio, and thank